Yeah, good evening. My name is Pragna, and I'm currently doing my residency in CMC Vellore. Today, we'll be discussing on anastomotic aneurysms. This is a sister topic to the recently discussed graft infection. So, an anastomotic aneurysm is a progressive dilatation of the anastomosis between either the artery or the processes or the vein, which is usually caused by arterial wall degeneration or usually by a defective suture line. Usually, this is seen mainly in prosthetic grafts. In various series, they have observed that 92% of anastomotic aneurysms are related to prosthesis implantation, and very few are actually due to autogenous grafts. It's a late complication of arterial reconstruction, and if it is seen early, we need to suspect coincident infection. And majority of these aneurysms are false aneurysms, which are composed of fibrous pseudocapsule. Rarely, they are true aneurysms composing the whole arterial wall. The first case was described in 1956 by Birch between aortic graft and proximal aortic anastomosis. Because of the late nature of the presentation as well as difficulties in detection, these aneurysms present challenges in evaluation and management. So usually they are seen at a mean period of 6 years following graft implantation. But if there is a coincident infection, so any aneurysm which is presenting less than 2 years from the graft implantation, we need to consider coincident infection. Again, there can be aneurysms, anastomotic aneurysms following occlusive disease or anastomotic aneurysms following aneurysmal disease. So when they looked at aneurysmal versus occlusive disease, they've seen that occlusive disease anastomotic aneurysms occur at a much later date than aneurysmal disease. I expected. So, Celiaki, who's actually proposed the graft infection classification, has done an extensive research into this. They've looked at almost 10,000 anastomosis and found that they had an incidence of around 1.7% overall. That's including both the aortic and the femoral and the iliac sites. The most common site of anastomotic aneurysm is from the femoral artery, which is seen in various anastomosis from 0.5% to almost 24%. However, the incidence in aortic and iliac sites may be underestimated because of their silent presentation and lack of follow-up imaging, which is usually not recommended based on the SVS criteria. So when we look at another series looking at incidence of aneurysm across sites, so at femoral sites it's around 5%, at iliac it's around 7%, and at the aortic site it's around 5%, iliac it's around 7%, and femoral sites it's about 14%. We've also seen aneurysms following carotid endarterectomy, either with or without patch, with the autogenous patch or with a prosthetic patch, and the incidence of anastomotic aneurysms at the carotid is around 0.3% following occlusive disease. When we look at carotid aneurysms following aneurysmal, so what is the pathogenesis of development of an anastomotic aneurysm? Usually, it is secondary to arterial wall degeneration. That is basically the disease is progressing in the adjacent wall next to the anastomotic. Or it may be secondary to suture line disruption, either due to technical aspects or due to the suture as it is. And like I already said, that it's almost seen exclusively between prosthetic grafts, and in native vessels, the occurrence are almost nil. So the pathogenesis involves a pulsatile hematoma, which falls because of anastomotic failure, which gets peripherally lined by a laminated thrombus and which is eventually encapsulated by surrounding host tissue, again signaling that this is a false aneurysm. And once it is subjected to systemic arterial pressure, these aneurysms enlarge and lead to local complications of expansion, distal embolization, or rupture. So, what are the factors which predispose to the development of anastomotic aneurysms? Well, we can divide them into local and systemic factors. Local factors like arterial wall degeneration, that is progressing atherosclerosis or aneurysmal disease, suture line disruption, prosthetic graft failure, infection or inflammation, as in vasculitis, technical errors, and mechanical stress. Systemic factors like continuing smoking, hyperlipidemia, which is uncontrolled hypertension, perioperative anticoagulant usage, systemic vasculitis, as well as generalized arterial weakness. So when we look at each of these factors separately, most of the studies have shown that the over-encompassing factor in all anastomotic aneurysm development is arterial wall degeneration, which is the most frequent cause, attributing to around 30% of all the other etiologies. This is usually due to progression of atherosclerosis, which compromises the vessel integrity. When they looked at under the microscope and compared the anastomotic aneurysm to the adjacent tissue, they found there is a reduction or absence of the elastic fibers in the media, along with the replacement of smooth muscle and hyaline degeneration as well in media and adventitia. So the next important factor is suture line disruption, because the prosthesis is not a native vessel like an autogenous graft. It is said that the prosthetic to the vessel anastomosis is indefinitely dependent on integrity of the suture line. So suture plays a major role here. Initially, when they started doing vascular anastomosis, they were using silk, which is actually phagocytosed internally, and obviously which has predisposes to a high risk of suture line complications, especially aneurysmal complications and suture breakdown. But what we routinely use nowadays, which has minimal tissue reactivity and thrombogenicity, as well as resistance to infection, and it can maintain the anastomosis without any biodegradation. However, the handling of the suture becomes important here, because polypropylene is susceptible to handling damage either by instruments or by electrothermal damage, or by pulling it. So it frays and fractures. So we have to be careful with the technique of suturing. The other sutures they've looked at include a PTFE suture. This actually has been shown to have no special effect over the Prolene suture in predisposing towards the anastomotic aneurysm. So this is actually a picture from Rutherford, which shows the electron microscopic picture of what happens when we handle a Prolene suture. When we pull it, either slow pulling or fast pulling or secondary to thermal damage, we can see that though it may be macroscopically not visible, microscopic damage can not lead to early complications but may later present as anastomotic pseudoaneurysms and cause significant morbidity and mortality. So there are non-suture methods available like rings, staples, clips, cuffs, stents, and adhesives. However, only clips have been associated with acceptable complication profile, but long-term complications have not yet been assessed with this kind of vascular anastomotic sutures. So the other thing which predisposes to anastomotic aneurysm formation is graft failure. So the graft itself may dysfunction, like how we see in type 3 endoleaks. So the textile graft dilatation and the compliance mismatch between the graft and the artery is plays a major role in graft failure, leading to anastomotic aneurysms. So how we can prevent it is incorporate a greater margin of the graft into the anastomosis, which leads to better holding and a reduced incidence of graft failure. The other factor that we have to suspect is a coincident infection or a systemic inflammatory process that is going on. So when we implant a prosthetic material, there is a high chance that if the surgical technique is not proper, there might be a hematoma or a lymphocele or associated acquired vasculitis. There is also an incident of acute or indolent graft infection. So the surgical technique needs to be precise, and we need to direct our attention towards the same. When they actually looked at bacterial isolates from excised graft material, these patients who didn't have any infective features like either local features or systemic features, they've actually isolated in 60 to 80% of the people cons, that is coagulative negative staphylococcus. So indolent infection plays an important role in late graft complications like anastomotic aneurysm development. The other local thing attributing to the anastomotic aneurysm development is the surgical technique. So we have to incorporate generous portions of the arterial wall, especially when we are subjecting it to a concurrent endarterectomy to prevent anastomotic breakdown. Also, graft tension during construction of an anastomosis should be assessed and it should be prevented. Incorrect suture handling, like we've already discussed, should be taken care of. Also, we have to use sutures of adequate strength and size, which is based on the surgical preference and surgeon's preference and experience. Coming to mechanical stress, like based on loss of fluid mechanics, we do know that the prosthetic graft and the artery have a compliance mismatch, and the prosthetic graft is not as distensible as a native artery, which imposes shear stress on the anastomosis. Greater the diameter, especially in an end-to-side anastomosis, which causes increased turbulence in an artery, the tension on the suture line is also greater. This is based on the Laplace law. And the other thing that they have noticed is larger the incident angle between the graft and the artery, the flow rate will be lower and the turbulence will be higher, and the stress on the suture line is again increased. So what they propose is to reduce this mechanical stress is either to construct an end-to-end anastomosis, which has lower turbulence and lesser shear stress, or when we are constructing an end-to-side anastomosis to minimize the angle to impart a hemodynamic benefit and prevent late graft complications. The systemic factors are again factors which predispose to degeneration of the arterial wall, like smoking, hypertension, and uncontrolled lipids. They've also noted that when we place the patients for some or the other reason on perioperative systemic anticoagulation, this leads to increase in local wound complications, especially hematoma development, which though may not lead to early complications, is a factor in late anastomotic aneurysm development, either by increasing the chance of infection or by increasing the chance of suture line disruption. The other thing there is prevention, because once the anastomotic aneurysm forms, the techniques of repair are complex, and also there is significant morbidity and mortality associated with it. The primary thing comes back to the surgical technique, right from the suturing to the incorporation of the graft and the artery to the kind of suture that we take and handling the suture. So again, like we've stressed before, try to do an end-to-end anastomosis, and if end-to-side is to be done to preserve critical vascular beds, then we need to make sure that the angle incident is acute, so that there won't be shear stress on the anastomosis. Again, the prosthetic diameter should be taken care of. The prosthetic diameter should be equal to that of the recipient artery. That again might pose increase in the diameter of the anastomosis, which according to Laplace's law translates into increased tension on the anastomosis. Aseptic operative technique goes without saying. We do know that once we place the prosthesis in patient, they are prone to infection. And perioperative antibiotic administration, again, to reduce the chances of infection. Other strategies like meticulous hemostasis, avoiding lymphatic disruption, avoiding adventitial dissection, and appropriate wound closure, again to reduce wound complications and reduce later anastomotic breakdown. And further, periodic surveillance. Though according to the SVS guidelines, until and unless there is a complication or there is a loss of, there is symptomatic symptoms in the patient, or there is a lack of pulse, usually there is no indication for CT in a patient who undergoes an aortic bifemoral bypass. So that is the reason that we miss out on most of these aneurysms. So especially if the suspicion is high, they advise to do a long-term evaluation with the cross-sectional imaging. So coming to the diagnosis, most of these aneurysms are asymptomatic. They're sometimes discovered incidentally during routine surveillance or radiological imaging for something else. So this is a paper that looked at 142 anastomotic aneurysms in the femoral location over 20 years. And more than 50% of them have been asymptomatic of pulsatile mass, while about 20% presented with acute limb ischemia, 9% presented as a painful groin mass, 7% presented with acute hemorrhage, and 1% presented with distal embolization and limb edema. When they looked at the infection profile in these aneurysms, it's about 7% of these aneurysms had overt infection. Coming to aortic and iliac anastomotic aneurysms, like we've already discussed, these have a very quiescent behavior because they are in the peritoneal cavity. Until and unless they are significantly increased in size, they have complication, they might not be detected. Or they might be detected on radiological surveillance for some other symptom. When we look at carotid anastomotic aneurysms usually display progressive asymptomatic enlargement. They might also present with side effects like local compression, distal embolization, neurological symptoms, or even rupture. The complication profile is around 3% in this location. Coming to imaging modalities, when suspected or if the patient is symptomatic, usually cross-sectional imaging is preferred. CT scan, MRI, and DSA have sufficient specificity, but only MRI possesses a good positive predictive value. That is basically based on the soft tissue evaluation characteristics of an MRI. When we suspect associated infection, we can also supplement this with a technician labeled white blood cell scan. Because of the degenerative nature of the anastomotic aneurysm development, synchronotic aneurysms are often detected in these patients. So 13% of patients with abdominal aortic anastomotic aneurysms have concurrent femoral aneurysms. So we should do a complete imaging of the whole graft to look at other synchronous aneurysm development. So what are the indications for treatment once an anastomotic aneurysm forms? So it usually depends on the things that we do for other pathologies also, like size, location of the aneurysm, what is the symptomatic status because of the aneurysm, and the suspected etiology. When they're at the femoral site, which is the most common site, like we've discussed, they may be safely observed till they achieve a diameter of 2 to 2.5 centimeters, given that they are asymptomatic. If they're symptomatic or if they have a overt infection, they have to be treated. And early appearance again suggests ominous etiology like an infection, especially within less than 2 years of implanting a graft. If there is an anastomotic aneurysm, we need to think that the patient has an infection unless proven otherwise. And aortic and iliac anastomotic aneurysms, at least based on the existing literature, should be considered for repair at discovery because one is the difficulties in surveillance, and two is once they develop a complication, based on the outcomes seen in various series, the morbidity and mortality rates are quite high. If the patient has a saccular aneurysm at the anastomosis, these usually behave aggressively and they may not be amenable to extended surveillance. So they are advised to intervene at the moment of detection. Coming to carotid aneurysms, they obligate the consideration for surgical repair because usually they're associated with infection, even though it is not clinically apparent, or they might end up having some complications. And in all these aneurysms, the repair should be based on assessment of the operative risk because these are usually late complications. So the patient might be quite elderly at presentation, as well as may have other coincident pathologies. The principles of treatment are mainly based on etiology, by which we mean whether it's an infective or a non-infective, based on the operative risk of the patient, and based on what is the best possible option, whether it's open or endovascular for the existing pathology. So the basic principles across all procedures are safe proximal and distal control, preservation of important branches and collaterals, replacement or exclusion. So what we need to think about is this will be a densely scarred and an altered surgical field because of already prior major operation. So excessive mobilization should be avoided to prevent dislodgement or distal embolization of the thrombus which is present within the anastomotic aneurysm. And endovascular techniques are particularly suitable for treatment of aortic and iliac anastomotic aneurysms. So we'll be discussing open and endovascular repair across different sites. So open repair may be either simple repair of the anastomosis. If there is an arterial wall degeneration or a graft deterioration, this may need a replacement by either an autogenous graft or another prosthetic graft. So coming to the femoral site, usually interposition grafting is preferred or an extra anatomic bypass if there is overt infection. PTFE is the choice of conduit here because it has a reduced propensity for dilatation. again, end-to-end configuration is recommended, or if the end to side, minimum incident angle. And if there is overt infection, vascular soft tissue coverage can be achieved with rotational muscle flaps. So this is again a representation of a femoral anastomotic aneurysm with arterial wall degeneration, which is either replaced by an end to side or an end-to-end anastomosis as shown here. And the picture side next to that shows the various methods of doing extra anatomical bypass if gross groin infection is present, so as to bypass the infected site. Coming to the aortic anastomosis, open repair options include either retroperitoneal or transperitoneal options. This is again based on the surgeon's experience and his preference. The good bit about the retroperitoneal is that we won't enter the altered tissue plane and we can access a virgin area. So usually this entails a suprarenal clamp because our anastomosis, our proximal aortic anastomosis will be immediate infrarenal in location. So we can excise the degenerated area and usually perform an aorto-aortic bypass with a tubular processes from the normal aorta to the existing graft distally. Less frequently, if they have synchronous aneurysms, they might require an aorto-bifemoral or an aorto-iliac bypass also. If there is overt infection, again, we would do an extra anatomical bypass or an autogenous grafting. Coming to iliac anastomosis, if there is anastomotic aneurysm at the iliac area, retroperitoneal approach through a flank incision may be enough. The preservation of the internal iliac artery may be needed to be accomplished by a graft by a bypass from the contralateral iliac. At least one internal iliac should be preserved to preserve the pelvic blood flow. The other thing is, again, this may be an altered surgical plane because of previous dissection and scarring. So urethral protection is one thing that they've advised, either by placing a urethral stent or by identifying the ureter in the virgin area and tracing it down. Coming to the carotid anastomosis, principles of treatment are same. You resect the aneurysm and do an interposition bypass graft. And if it is quite distal, then you might have to, and reconstruction options are not there, then we might have to end up with a carotid ligation. However, the mortality rate when performing a carotid ligation is from 28 to 50%. Coming to endovascular options at various anastomosis again. When looking at the femoral anastomosis, it's at the flexural area, and the chronic hip motion will cause a deformation, fracture, or migration of the stent. So, however, in cases who have prohibitive risk, there have been reports of using self-expandable stent grafts like Viaban or Fluency with successful results. Looking at aortic anastomosis, like we've already discussed, open surgery in resurgery to address an aortic anastomotic aneurysm has considerable morbidity and mortality. So endovascular is a preferred option here. So they've used various fenestrated, branched, and chimney graft devices. Need to pay attention to the proximal neck and usually might need suprarenal fixation for proximal stability, along with the visceral vessel reconstruction, which may be totally endovascular or may need a hybrid procedure. So there have been reports of using just tubular endografts to fix the anastomotic aneurysm. However, because the reliance is only on the radial force, the late complications are high. This can be prevented by sufficient graft oversizing. The other options include how we routinely do a AAA exclusion by using either a modular bifurcated endograft or by using a uni-iliac graft with a adjunctive fem-fem bypass. So Ziegler et al. Studied paraaortic aneurysm repair using endovascular grafts, and the technical success rate was 97% with a 3% 30-day mortality, and reintervention rates were around 18%. So there have been short and mid-term outcomes which are quite better as compared to an open procedure. However, the long-term outcomes are still unknown when we look at endovascular repair for aortic anastomotic aneurysms. But before we proceed with an endovascular repair, concurrent gross infection and aorta entry fistula should be generally ruled out. If we are doing endovascular repair as a bridge strategy in the presence of an infection, then the patient will need extensive antibiotic treatment with a possible lifelong antibiotic prophylaxis. There have also been some case reports where there are favorable morphology with a sacral paraanastomotic aneurysm, where they have been using percutaneous embolization either by using coils or by using cyanoacrylate glue or by Amplatzer occluder devices. And in one case report, they've also used transcatheter delivery of thrombin. When we look at iliac anastomosis and endovascular options, we can use a stent graft and exclude the aneurysm. There is a case report where we are seeing that there is an iliac aneurysm at the external iliac around the bifurcation, which has been successfully excluded by stent graft placement. Again, as in the open repair, the internal iliac artery patency is one thing that is important, which is either at least one internal iliac should be flowing. So either do like either do a complete endovascular or do a hybrid repair by preserving the patency by doing an contralateral external to the internal bypass. So coming to carotid anastomotic aneurysms, so open option in a carotid anastomotic aneurysm is difficult, especially because of difficult dissection and high risk of cranial nerve injury. So stent grafts, endovascular balloon occlusion devices, and bare metal stents with adjunctive coil embolization have been described across case reports. They have seen that length of hospital stay, cranial nerve injury, and 30-day mortality rates were significantly lower with endovascular as compared to conventional open repair. Well, when we look at outcomes as compared to a normal aneurysm, these anastomotic aneurysms are associated with greater morbidity and mortality. We are re-entering a surgical field, and as well as because of the late presentation, usually the patients are elderly and they have advanced medical illnesses. Mulder et al. Had looked at open repair in 220 aortic anastomotic aneurysms, which they managed successfully, and they found that their intraoperative mortality rates are as high as 5% in elective procedure and 25% in emergency circumstances, which again points that we have to repair the aortic aneurysms electively rather than once they present with complications. Their morbidity rate was around 53%, 50% in elective and 70% in emergency operations, with 14% reintervention rates and 3% amputation rate. Survival on follow-up also was significantly higher for elective than emergency cases. All this points out that once an aortic or an iliac anastomotic aneurysm is detected, we prefer to do a elective reconstruction rather than an emergency reconstruction because of the very high mortality and morbidity associated with it. When we compare the open repair to endovascular procedure, Bosch et al. Had looked at the durability of endovascular reconstruction, and they found that they have a very high technical success rate, around 90%, with reduced morbidity and mortality, as well as comparable reintervention rates to open procedures. They had a mean follow-up of up to 41 months, and they've seen that exclusion was successfully maintained in 86% of these anastomotic aortic aneurysms by endovascular repair. However, the most important point here is the decision making based on the morphology of the aneurysm as well as the presence of concurrent infection. Once we find that the patient can be routed to an endovascular repair, endovascular does have a better prognosis, especially in aortic and iliac aneurysms as compared to open repair. When they looked at risk of recurrence and factors leading to recurrence of reappearance of another anastomotic aneurysm, they've realized that it's again graft failure and continuation of the arterial degradation, either because of poor controlled atherosclerotic risk factors, local wound complications, and they have seen that anastomotic aneurysms are higher in the female sex as compared to the male sex. So I think in conclusion, we need to know that anastomotic aneurysms are rare. They're more commonly seen with prosthetic aortic and iliac and femoral reconstruction rather than autogenous grafts. and they do present challenges in evaluation and management, especially aortic because they might be quiescent. Femoral are usually peripheral in location, they might be easily detectable. We do have endovascular and open options. Endovascular are preferred options for aortic, iliac, as well as carotid anastomotic aneurysms, while open are preferred options for femoral aortic aneurysm. In the presence of infection, gross infection, we do need to consider open options, either by autogenous grafting or by an extra anatomical bypass. And the recurrence rates are dependent on the sex of the patient, the controlling of the atherosclerotic risk factors, and local wound complications. Thank you.